let's turn to Starmer's EU reset deal, which was sealed earlier this week. I mean, this isn't Brexit, this is Brentrance, George. Can you tell us what was in it? You were at the summit.
Yes, that's right. I mean, it was a big moment. At the heart of it, reduced checks and red tape on food. The government hopes that will mean cheaper food for us in the supermarkets and better deal for British exporters. New defence and security partnership, combining the UK and European emission trading schemes, changes to e-passport gates for British tourists to try and reduce queues, although it's not clear how soon that will take effect. And then they're going to explore a youth mobility scheme. Final details yet to be agreed on that. There's obviously some nervousness about that in government, given the history of free movement and their desire to reduce immigration. But the big picture is the UK getting closer to Europe again. But this is not seen as a Remainer crusade, that it's an attempt to try and get beyond the Remain-Leave divide. I think the government is encouraged by polling showing that there's overwhelming support for getting closer to Europe again. But Keir Starmer says very explicitly, we've signed trade deals with the US and India. That wouldn't be possible if we were still a member of the customs union. So it's really an attempt at pragmatic moves rather than a return to Keir Starmer's old Remainer days.
Is it a good deal, Andrew?
I think it is a good deal. The red lines remain, and whatever Remainers in the Labour Party hope, I don't think that's going to change before the election. There's no chance of that. I talked to Nick Thomas-Symonds, the minister who negotiated all of this. I think it's a good deal in those sort of practical, basic ways. I think it will produce, in due course, more variety and lower prices in the shops. I think it will bring jobs. It appears at first sight to be relatively piffling. The Prime Minister talked about a 9 billion a year uplift to the economy. That contrasts with 100 billion a year that economists say we have lost as a result of Brexit, so quite small. However, that figure does not include any estimates about the impact of the defence and security alliance, because there's lots of details still to be negotiated on that. But, an early sign that this can bring much better news for the government and the country is the company MBDA, which, to be absolutely clear, is a European defence company, not somebody manufacturing drugs for dance halls, has announced 700 extra jobs in missile technology in Bolton. And I think we're going to see an awful lot more of that. Of course, there are issues of intellectual property and stuff to be negotiated, but that 150 billion euro defence fund is enormous. And Rolls-Royce, Babcock, the other British Aerospace Systems and other companies are looking at that with our mouths watering. They think this will bring a lot of high-quality, good jobs into the country for the first time. So in all those ways, I think it's a really, really good deal. It is not a return to the EU. It is a kind of return to Europe. It offers a new relationship with Europe. And although it's relatively small first steps, we're taking small steps in a different direction. And if you walk in a slightly different direction, even with small steps, then quite quickly the difference is bigger and bigger and bigger with where you would have gone. Was that a kind of completely incomprehensible metaphor?
I followed it. I followed the footsteps.
And just the final thing I'd add is that although I don't think we're going to go back into the customs union or the single market, there's now a system for annual summits of this kind. This was the first British EU summit since Brexit. And these are now going to happen every year. Once you've got that happening every year, you have kind of civil servants on both sides looking forward to the agenda. And it looks to me like this is the beginning of tighter relations in all sorts of things. And people will be asking if we can swallow dynamic alignment in order to sell more food and agricultural produce to the EU and vice versa. Why can't we do that in other areas?
And George, just lastly on this topic, I mean, what are the political risks here? The deals come under sharp criticism from the fishing industry and even figures within Labour. So Labour's First Minister in Wales suggested that she'd been sidelined on that decision. And of course, you've had the criticism that you might expect from the Conservatives,
very
Reform,
extreme.
the right-wing press.
Can we just say the language has been absolutely deranged? Surrender, betrayal, treason, humiliation. This is a trade agreement. We're not at war with
Done up like a kipper.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really don't think that this Brexit betrayal narrative has landed. But look, here are the risks. The risk is that this becomes the equivalent of the alternative vote. What do I mean by that? So during the row over electoral reform, you had those who sort of championed proportional representation, those who wanted to keep first past the post. And you'll remember we had that referendum on the alternative vote back in 2011, which Nick Clegg had just once described that system as a miserable little compromise. The risk is that this deal gets framed by Labour's opponents as a miserable little compromise. On the left, you'll have the Greens and the Lib Dems saying we want to rejoin single market customs union or rejoin the EU entirely. On the right, you'll have the Conservatives and Reform saying that this is a Brexit betrayal. And you'll have Keir Starmer stuck in the middle, not for the first time, and at risk of pleasing no one. Here's how I think it could work to the government's advantage, though. It's overwhelmingly backed by British business. As Andrew said, there's cause for economic optimism on the benefits. I think Labour will be able to tell a good story by the time of the next election. And if the Conservatives and Reform go into that election saying we would reverse that, then they will be able to frame them as irresponsible and have the dividing line that all governments love, which is stability versus more of the Brexit chaos that you all voted to get rid of.
And also stop banging on about Brexit.
Well, two points on that. It comes after, of course, the Indian trade deal and the US trade deal, both opposed by the opposition parties, and like this one. So they're in the position of being able to say, OK, you said after Brexit you want to trade with the rest of the world. We're doing this trade deal with the United States, with India, and now with the European Union. Why, how are we going to survive if we can't do trade deals with anybody else? So that's the first problem. I think the answer to George's fundamental question on, are they going to be caught between two stools? Is this an unpopular middle way? Is actually, I think, the fundamental British view on Brexit at the moment is give it a rest. We're tired. We're bored. Oh, shut up. And there's a very interesting piece by the very strongly pro-Brexit columnist in Sunday Times, Rod Liddell, when he went up to Middlesbrough this week. I don't often praise Rod's columns, but this was really interesting, and he was talking to lots of fellow Brexiteers in Middlesbrough, and there was a weary, exhausted resignation with the whole issue, and they quite liked the idea of a better relationship. And I think this, they don't want Steve Bray and the Europhiles shouting at them from one side, and they're bored of the Brexiteers endlessly calling betrayal on the other. And that's why I think in the end this will work.